So like Brett said, Katie, my wife, and I are here. We volunteer with the Acts Ministry. That's Katie's full-time job. And y'all are going to get an interesting experience because when I speak to the students, I usually monologue at them for like 45 minutes. So we're going fast today. But Katie will talk some more about this. We'll dig into some of what it means that we work with the Acts students and what Acts is and what that's looking like. But what I was asked to talk to you all about this morning was part of a sermon series that I know you guys have kind of been going through based on this idea of small things, wise and wonderful. And we were given kind of a list of topics that fit into this really well, and I jumped at one of them because we talk about it with our students all the time. And that's based on this passage that Izzy just read for us in James 1, verses 26 and 27. And we teach this to the students every single year. Which might seem strange for a college ministry. Why this passage? Why focus on this particular teaching? But we'll dig into that. I want to start with actually going through, though, what this passage means. And I'm going to do it kind of in a couple of different segments. So we'll start with that first verse that I'm going to read again. If anyone considers himself religious and does not bridle his tongue, he deceives his heart, and his religion is worthless. Now, the key here was actually in the second verse. What we were going to talk about was mostly in the second verse, but this first verse, I think, is so key to understanding what's going on here. And so let's actually start with that word religion, because this kind of might jump out at us as something that's kind of intense, right? The way we use that word today, we might think of a lot of different things when you say the word religion. Well, it's what I believe about God, right? Somebody might believe that God is this or God is that. For us, it's being a Christian, right? Religion is Christianity. And I don't want to get too muddy into what exactly that means for us today, but let's look at what it meant for them. And a good definition we're going to use for today, as you're thinking through this, think less about the belief system and more about the belief practice, right? A word that we might use might be something like piety or practice, right? Something that we do based on what we believe. If you think about the Jewish people at the time of Jesus, who, by the way, is who James is writing to, a largely Jewish audience, right? It's not that there were people as much who were Jews and not Jews religiously and then ethnically. At that time, it was almost the same thing across the board, right? At that time, to be a Jew ethnically meant to be a Jew religiously, but there was still a divide. Jesus talks to the Pharisees a lot about how they consider themselves so much more righteous. Well, what is that about? Their adherence to the law. They thought they're more religious, right? Because they do more of the law than this lowly fisherman. So that's kind of the idea in the mind at the time when he says your religion. If you think you're religious, but do not bridle your tongue. So why focus on that? Bridle your tongue, right? If he's saying, if you think that you practice what you believe well, if you think that you're a Christian and you practice that, but don't bridle your tongue, then it's worthless. Why say that? Well, I would quote Jesus, right, who says in Matthew 12:34, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? What James is calling out here is that what you're saying, right, says something about who you are. And that's a major theme of this whole book. As you dig through, James is going to talk a lot about what we do reflecting who we are, and therefore what we do matters. And with that in mind, we dig into the second verse. Pure and undefiled religion, right? To practice Christianity in a way that is pure and undefiled religion before our God and Father is this, to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Okay, so if our topic here has been small things, wise and wonderful, right? We start to see maybe some things that we might look at that I'm going to talk about here. Widows and orphans, to be with widows and orphans in their distress, right? These are some of the people, especially in their day, who are the most on the margins, the most vulnerable, people who in their culture could not fend for themselves. And what he's calling out here is actually the heart of God towards those people. The reason that this is pure and undefiled religion before God is because of the heart God has for his wonderful creation. He considers those who are most on the margins just as important, just as valuable, just as good a part of his creation. And his care for them, and his command for his people to care for them has been consistent throughout history. In Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 through 3, when Abraham first receives the promise that results ultimately in Jesus, first receives the promise from God that he will be father of a great nation, God says to him, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you. It has always been God's intention that his people be blessed to be a blessing to others. In Leviticus chapter 19, we're receiving more and more of the law. God is explaining to his people how he wants them to behave. Amongst all of those things, right? Many talking about how to treat the poor, how to treat the foreigner, right? And it culminates in something that we often attribute to Jesus, but Jesus is actually quoting the heart of God from all the way back in Leviticus, where he says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against any of your people. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. This has always been part of God's heart for his creation and his intention for how his people should behave. Obviously culminating in the teachings of Jesus, things like this verse we're reading today taught by his apostles, things like the Good Samaritan, these teachings that we're so familiar with that tell us how we're supposed to treat the downtrodden, how we're supposed to treat those who have less than us. This is God's heart for his creation. So who are those people? Well, I would argue that they're the orphans and widows, right, as the verse says. And definitely that's still true today. I know that this church actually has a really wonderful ministry for those who have lost their spouse, to be able to encourage one another, to be able to be supported by the church. And that's incredible. That's important. That's a huge part of this. And yes, orphans, we as the church need to be supporting them. But I want us to think about those people as we go throughout our weeks, right? Think about those people who are the most vulnerable. And yes, it's the orphans and the widows. But sometimes it's also wider than that, right? James goes on to talk about partiality, right? Not showing favoritism. And his example is the poor over the rich, right? That passage in Leviticus, if you read through Leviticus chapter 19, if you read through the Old Testament as a whole, God is going to give law after law after law about not taking advantage of the poor. What about the immigrant, right? We have students who come over who have now no community, who have no family to support them, who are figuring out new laws, trying to figure out how to pass school without getting deported, all of these things. They're vulnerable. I talked to Alec Hill this morning about him going with some of his coworkers who are from Bosnia to a memorial. Some of you might not know, but we have a very large population of Bosnian people here in St. Louis that were displaced by war. And the people who were killing them called themselves Christians. Should we not be with them in their distress as well? This goes so much wider, church. We need to be with these people in their distress, those who are the most on the margins, who are the most vulnerable. God calls the smallest of his creation, the most overlooked, wonderful, right? But there are other small things in this verse. You might see the orphan, you might see the widow, but there's another party here, and that's the one being taught. That's us, right? Who is James speaking to? Because the next part of the verse says, and to remain unpolluted by the world. So if we're going to talk about the orphan and the widow, right, and say that this is God's wonderful creation, and they're considered small, right? The least able to defend themselves, the least able, the smallest voice. Why would I call us out as another party in that category? Well, I'm going to focus on the idea of small things wise. When we teach James to our students, we talk about how similar it is to Proverbs, something we would call the book of wisdom. If you read the two side by side, you really start to see some similarities. And I think this is important here. In fact, Proverbs has a lot to say about the same subject. I could go through many verses, but my favorite and maybe most poignant is Proverbs 17, verse 5, that says, "He who mocks the poor insults their maker. Whoever gloats over calamity will not go unpunished." Wow. It's a pretty big indictment. So why talk about this as wisdom? Why relate this to Proverbs? It just says a very similar thing. It's hammering home the point. But I think there's a bigger reason to talk about wisdom. And that's because wisdom begins with the fear of God. And this concept is so important. We see it 3 different places in Scripture, at least. Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Psalms 111:10, The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All who follow his precepts gain rich understanding. Job 28:28. And he said to man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to turn away from evil is understanding. Knowing God and turning away from evil is understanding, right? This is what it looks like to be unstained by the world. Now, why focus on this? If the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and to act in this way, right, to be with the orphans and widows in their stress, to not mock the poor, to not gloat over calamity, if that's wisdom, and it begins with the fear of the Lord, then it starts to take our goodness out of the equation, right? I love doing things like this and just seeing the Spirit move, because I don't know, Kaz, I've never met you before, but wow, like that was amazing hearing you talk about some of these passages during communion, because this is exactly what I was going to dig into here. Is if this is about, right, the theme of James, if this is about the theme of James being who you are, what you do says something about who you are, and therefore what you do matters, right? If this is about the heart, if this is a heart condition, then it's not about us, because God is the one who gives us a new heart. Famously in Ezekiel, there's prophecy about what God will eventually do through Jesus, where he says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. You see, if we're going to do these things, if we're going to act in this way, if we're going to have true wisdom that starts with fearing God, the things that we do don't bring glory to us, they bring glory to God. Jesus talks about this. We're very familiar with the idea of being the light of the world, but sometimes we miss part of this verse. He says in Matthew 5, verse 16, in the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Not that they may see your good deeds and go, Christians are good people, or say, wow, good job, right? But you do good things in such a way that shows that that could only be God working through you. We are small too, right? We don't get to be big by helping the people who are most on the fringes. We're the hands and feet of Jesus. It's not us who get the credit. We've already read this morning, 2 Corinthians 12:9, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is perfected in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest on me. And we even see this example time and time again in Jesus' ministry, right? Yes, he shows compassion. He heals. And then he says, go and sin no more. And consistently gives glory to God the Father, for whom he's acting under, right? Giving this example, people walk away shocked by his compassion, then listening to his rebuke, and often following him. See this example even in Jesus. Now, if we take this to heart and we say God can work through anyone, right? It's not about us, right? God is the one who brings these actions. Our fear of the Lord starts the wisdom we need to be able to act in these ways. Then we have to accept that it's not just the big people who can help with these things, right? We don't have to wait for the lawyers and the doctors, people who have been blessed with money, our great tech giants, right, to donate money to help for these orphans and these widows. Anyone can be effective in this. Anyone can be used by God because he's the one who's going to do the thing. He just wants us to be willing, right? And that includes some other small people who we don't think have that much, right? Our college students. And that's one of the reasons that we talk about this every single year, because we take our college students every year to the Southern Christian Children's Home in Morrilton, Arkansas, to serve in this capacity, because there are orphans there, right? And we want them to put this verse into practice, because God can work through them who have no money, no time. They're still figuring out what it means to be an adult, but it doesn't limit what God can do. And we see every year the way that they connect with these young people who are the most vulnerable, who have been abandoned, who have parents who are unable to take care of them, right? And we see students praying with them, sharing the gospel, playing with them, showing them love. And it's always incredible. But why do we focus on this verse so much? Why do we talk about this as a great way to serve? Why do we think it's so important? Well, a big part of it is when we take them down there. Yes, it's a great place to serve. There are many great places to serve. But at the end of our time there, we'll often do kind of a debrief. where we ask the students, hey, like, what do you think? Like, what happened? What was good? What was difficult? And I can think of a time specifically where we're sitting down and the students are talking about how they had this great experience, right? And these kids are really they have hope. And they talk about how they thought it was going to be really difficult and really depressing, but it's really happy. Like, this is a group that have multiple sets of house parents, this facility with all of these resources, and they're giving these orphans, right? These people who have no one else another shot, and they're showing them who Jesus is in the process. They're sharing the gospel. And they're talking about how impactful that was, right? How cool it is to see that happening. And man, I wish I could introduce you all to the director of children's services. There is a man named Charlie. He's the coolest 5'0" man with brittle bone disease you'll ever meet. And he's always goofing off with our students and telling them all these things. He's also incredibly wise, and there's a reason he's in charge of children's services. And it's incredible that he has such the attitude that he has with the things he has to deal with. Because as they're talking about how incredible this is and how hopeful it is, I stop him and I turn to Charlie and I say, hey, Charlie, how many people do you have to turn away every month because you don't have the resources, because you don't have the support, you don't have the money, you're not able to take on more of these young kids? And it's dozens in one small corner of the state of Arkansas. Dozens. Because the truth is, right, if God is working through us, right, if God wants us to be the people who are with the orphans and the widows in their distress, if the church doesn't do it, it's not going to get done. Now, that makes this very important, right? There's a reason that James hammers this home in such a big way. It's hard to talk about these things on a Sunday morning and not feel like this is like a call to action or an indictment. And I mean, hey, if the Holy Spirit's moving you, don't let me quench it, right? But that's actually not the reason that I get so excited to talk about this verse specifically here. Because what we really want to share with you is how God is doing these things already through this church. Brett talked about how this church has been supporting Acts for a very long time. It's been 28 years, actually, far longer than me and Katie have been doing it. And we get to see all the time this play out. God taking these college students, some of the smallest, right, who have no money, no time, they're trying to figure out who they are, and we see him changing their heart. We see him acting, doing what God does, changing their heart, giving them the ability to serve, bringing them to himself, and then turning them around and having them serve those who are most vulnerable. And that's only able to be done because of the service that is enabled by the volunteers here who help us with meals, who donate money, because of you all. And you don't get to see it all the time, but we do. So I'm going to have Katie come on up, and she's going to give you more of an update on what it looks like week to week, what's been going on, and what we have going on this summer and in the next semester.
McKnight family, we're so glad to be with you all. I'm glad my husband could share some of those stories, and I'm going to share some more because we love talking about Jesus most of all, but second to that is our students. So I'll be sharing some with you. And just like Trevor said, as you can see on our first slide here, our vision for Acts is students knowing Christ, making Christ known, right? So it's God reaching the least of these and then using them to reach more. We talk to the students all the time. We're happy to study the Bible with your roommates. We're happy if you bring your teammates and your classmates. We want to meet them. We want to reach them. But guess who God has equipped most to reach your roommate? You. And so we're trying to train up and teach the students to reach their peers and to make Christ known on the campuses they're on. So by way of update, we'll go to the next slide. This is our Friday night thing. This is kind of what we're known for, our large group Friday night home-cooked meal, which is like one of our best ministry tools we have in our tool belt. This year especially, we've been able to use here at McKnight on the 4th floor. If you don't know, the classroom off of the main room on the 4th floor is what we've been able to use for our Acts room. We've low-key modeled it after AJ and Susan's living room, so if you see some similarities in there, you might notice the layout. But that's been a huge blessing. We've kind of been nomads for a couple years, and the students have told me it's been so nice this year to just have a space that like we go to every week, and we know what's there. It feels like home, and they definitely make themselves at home up there. So thank you for granting us that space. We have so many people who have provided meals, who have helped set up, clean up, and help us keep things going. So thank you for that. This past year on Friday nights, we have had kind of an interesting series. So in the fall, we studied rest. We talked about Sabbath. We talked about what biblical rest looks like, something that's kind of elusive in our culture, especially on college campuses. And each week we gave the students different challenges to help them practice slowing down and resting. Things like, for 7 minutes a day, turn your phone off and sit in silence. And I think we had 2 students who were able to do that for 7 minutes. and so I encourage you all to try. We had, okay, don't use your phone to order your food. Actually stand in line and don't scroll while you stand in line in the dining hall. Just stand there. Look around, see what you see. Things to try to help them slow down and practice heart rest as much as physical rest. In the spring, we talked about work and what it looks like, what biblical vocation looks like, what it means that people worked before the fall. So like work is not necessarily a broken thing. We talked about that. And this summer at our home, we're meeting with our smaller group of summer acts and talking about Jesus as the true and better Adam, and Jesus as the true and better Noah, and Jesus as the true and better Moses, and talking about Colossians 1, how Jesus is always supreme. I think this is a great time for students who are Christians to come together, but what's really cool is that students knowing Christ, making Christ known. This past year, we have one of our students had a roommate who, kind of like Trevor mentioned, was an international student who came to the U.S. for the first time, knew nobody, had no friends, had no community, had no resources, had never met a Christian before, and started coming to Friday nights, started checking out different churches. Different people of Acts had given him Bibles in his first language so he can start to understand a little bit better what's going on. And I've actually started a Bible study with him. And he's pretty excited about Jesus. He thinks Jesus is a really fascinating person. He's not so sure yet about a creator God, so we're working on it. But we've been able to have those opportunities because of hospitality. So that's been a huge blessing. That's our main group time. If we go to the next slide, you got to see the picture of the children's home. I had to include that. And if we go to the next, discipleship. So we've got a lot of different ways that we approach discipleship through the week. Things like Do Something Now, where we serve in the community, trying to get the students to think about the poor in our community and work at a food bank. We do things called Crave, where the students actually set up a sign, which is very brave, that says free donuts and prayer in the dining hall. And other students, who many are not believers, can come and ask. There's a lot of prayers about like chem exams and things like that that go up. But in just an hour of putting that sign out, we've had students praying over 30 different prayer requests and things for their peers and reaching out and being a light on campus. We have small group Bible studies that we call core groups. We have one-on-one mentoring. And then we have a lot of fun. We call them activities. Pretty cute, right? But things that are meant to build community and be soft landing points for seekers who are coming in. I think about, it's really cool that with the student I just mentioned, we're able to be this community for him. But I think about how little we are and how great God is. Even this past year, we had a freshman who grew up here in the United States, had never been in a church before, but had an experience before she came to college that made her think there must be a higher power, and I need to figure out about that. And so when she came to college, the first week she was here, she went to a church and she thought, this is it. Jesus is it. And she was baptized within the first 2 weeks of school, gave her life to Christ, and now all of a sudden she's a brand new Christian, freshman in college, and the first Christian in her family. And what do? And so she was able to get connected through Acts and have one-on-one mentoring to talk about things like, I'm a Christian now, what is dating supposed to look like? I'm a Christian now, how am I supposed to forgive people? and things that you kind of have to learn. So we're able to, even when it feels like we're not the ones doing it, God did all the work. He still lets us be a part of that, which is really a blessing. And on to the next. We've got a lot of plans coming up in the fall. So we've got our Welcome Week coming up here in August, where we have 10 days of intensive meeting all the freshmen that we possibly can. So we're excited for that. This year is going to be a rebuilding year. We had a lot of really awesome seniors graduate, which we're still a little bit mourning, but we'll be looking to rebuild our student leaders, and the ones that we have are going to do a great job. And lots of fall themed events. We've always got apple picking and pumpkin painting, things that seem like just fun events, but they're great opportunities to have conversations with students and find out where they're at and show them the warmth of Christ. If we can go to the next. So here's some ways that we want to continue to ask for your help. We're so thankful for how you've helped us in the past, but we always have Friday meals and also cleanup help. If Trevor and I have to do cleanup after the meal, that's less time we get to talk to the students and connect with them. So having a couple extra hands to help is always great. We've got our 5th annual day of prayer where we spend 24 hours praying over the ministry, and you can sign up for a 30-minute time slot for that. Or there's lots of other ways to get involved, volunteer, help with rides, help with different specific events. We're always looking for people to come alongside and see what God's doing too. One thing I didn't mention on there is some of our students are very talented and have designed some really awesome merch. So we have a new A.C.T.S merch store that you can get your hoodies, your hats, your t-shirts, all student designed, and the proceeds from that do also go to A.C.T.S. So we have information about that at the back of the room of the auditorium. I've put some flyers out. And if you want any, you can come grab me. A lot of this information will be in the church email coming up soon, with the meal train and the day of prayer sign up if you'd like to join us. And I just want to end with our last slide here, which is a verse that I think embodies how we feel about you guys and our gratitude for you. This is Paul writing to the Philippians, but you can also think of it as Katie and Trevor and the A.C.T.S students writing to the McKnight Crossings Church. But I thank God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. So thank you for your partnership in the gospel. We would love to answer any questions that you have, so find us. We'll be sticking around after class and between now and class. Thank you, church.